Today we're going to be talking about plagiarism and copyright. And we have a couple of bios by way of introduction for you while we're waiting for people to come in. I'm Sandra Riggs. I'm a research and instruction librarian based at the Miller Learning Center here on the Athens campus. And on this slide, you've got my email address, and you also have a link for EndNote or RefWorks training. The training sessions do happen on the Athens campus for that link, and you can contact Duncan directly. We'll also be giving you other links throughout the presentation for assistance. You can contact me through that link as well and through my email. We have a slide for Mariann Burright. I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself again when she starts her portion, but Mariann Burright is Head of Scholarly Communication, Copyright, and Science Collections at the University of Georgia. She teaches classes and provides assistance on copyright, open access publishing, and data management to UGA faculty and students. And she'll have her contact information on a slide at the very end because she'll be doing the second portion of our presentation today. Okay. So I'll start with mine. I'm going to focus on plagiarism and citation. So main question, what is plagiarism? You'll have access to a file of these slides, so you can have a format where you can click on these links. But basically the full information on how UGA defines plagiarism is online at the Academic Honesty site of the UGA website. But I'm going to talk about the most common forms of plagiarism very quickly. Generally, directly quoting without giving an indication, paraphrasing without attribution, and repeating data. So information or data that can be visual information like infographics, that can be images and figures in a report where there is an attribution. I think where people get into trouble is that we've been told throughout school to put an idea into your own words, and it's something that's very important to learn as a writer, to put an idea into your own words. The thing is, we tend to forget that the idea has to be attributed. So even though it's in your own words, you have to attribute the idea that you're communicating. So unintentional plagiarism is often kind of the most common plagiarism that happens on a university campus, and it may be considered less severe than intentional, but it's still plagiarism and it's still subject to academic honesty policies. So you want to try and avoid that. So there are many resources available online to help you stay away from plagiarism. We create library guides on the UGA Library's website, and all of those guides support either particular classes or skills such as plagiarism. I've put a link to a flowchart, and it's kind of a taking steps, did I plagiarize or not? Again, you'll wind up with a digital copy of these slides, and you can be clicking on the links to go through them yourself. But we also provide citation style guides, and we provide citation management software. So citation management software and citation style skills are important is because you avoid plagiarism with citation. So citations give the reader a way to find the original source of the ideas you're communicating. A citation style like APA, MLA, whatever style, is basically attribution formatted in a particular way to help the reader visually identify certain kinds of information quickly. So for example, in certain styles, if you see quotation marks, you know that that's either a short direct quote. If you see quotation marks in a reference or bibliography, that may mean that it's around the title of an article. Longer quotes are usually indented into block text. while you're reading through a paper, you'll see in-text citations that are put into parentheses. So all of this formatting is basically a form of indication so that the reader kind of has a quick way to know what it is that you're doing. So this is an example of a block quote and then a paraphrase. So the exact text is on the left. So students frequently overuse direct quotation, taking notes. So that quote is a few lines long. And so to indicate that is a quote, it's indented in on the left in a block. And then on the right is an example of a paraphrase. So again, that idea, I've put something into my own words. I've taken that longer block text and I've communicated it in maybe a smoother, quicker way, but I'm still needing to indicate that information came from Lester. And so I want to do that as my reader is going through, so you have the in-text citation at the end in parentheses. So you can do all that manually, or you can do things using the citation management software. So what does a citation management software or CMS do? It allows you to send citations from a database or a library catalog to create your own database of citations. So basically everything that you've used to create a paper or an article or a thesis, you have collected in one place so that you're not forgetting which sources you consulted. So you don't have to think, okay, where did I get this idea? It has to be from one of these items that I've imported into my CMS. It also allows you to link or save full text into your citations in the software program, and then to insert formatted citations into your word processing document. Most CMS software will also let you share citations with others. Sometimes that's online sharing. Sometimes that's being able to give someone a file that's essentially a library of the citations that you've collected. So UGA supports citation management software. The two programs we support are EndNote and RefWorks. So EndNote is something that you download from the library's website, and it's what we call client-based with an online backup. So what's client-based? Client-based is when you download an installer program, and then that file or program lives on that computer that you downloaded it to. So a lot of people like EndNote, particularly if they're laptop users. And so if you're working on one machine that's yours all of the time, you take it around with you, you keep your PDFs in one place, EndNote is probably a good choice. It also tends to get used heavily in the sciences. I work with the psychology department at UGA, and even in the social sciences, there's a lot of use of EndNote. It has an online backup, so all of the citations that live on your computer, you can also save into space up in the cloud that EndNote provides. So it's kind of the best of the both worlds of the client-based and then the online backup. RefWorks has a very different structure. RefWorks is entirely web-based, but you can have work with it in an offline mode. So it's a bit of the reverse. RefWorks is great for people who actually don't necessarily always work on the same computer. So let's say you're going lab to lab and you're working on machines that are in that lab, and so you can't be tied down to a system where the program is only living in one place. So you need to kind of always be in the cloud. You can create a RefWorks account at the same library's website link. And you would access it with the same information as if, you know, you were going to your UGA email. So that's your My ID information. Same with EndNote. If you want to download EndNote, you need your My UGA ID information to download it. Okay, just because I wanted to avoid any kind of technical difficulties or problems that might come from switching between a lot of applications, I'm not going to do a live demo of both EndNote and RefWorks, but I have some screenshots of EndNote that I hope will kind of give you an idea a little further of maybe questions you might want to ask if you wanted to investigate getting training for a citation manager. So this is a sample of a very small EndNote library. There's only like 50 references in it. But you can see on the left that I can utilize the database function of EndNote by organizing all of my citations into different folders. So I work at the MLC, and maybe I'm investigating some different programming for students. So I'm looking at things like digital wellness, Night Against Procrastinations, better sleep and relaxation events. So I've got subfolders under a group set for MLC. So these things are actually called groups, group sets and groups, and they can help you to organize your information. We've got different panes where you can see what's in your library, and you can see the different fields of information, and you can have a preview of a citation format like APA 6. And this is a window from our EBSCO multi-search database, and it just shows that you can directly export any kind of a citation you find, direct export in RIS format into EndNote. And then this is a screenshot of Microsoft Word for Mac. So in the background, you can see I'm, typing a paper, and I'm putting in some very specific information that needs to be cited. So I would put my cursor where I want to insert my citation, and then I would click in the toolbar, Insert Citation, and then you get this pop-up where it allows me to search my EndNote libraries to find the item that I want to cite in the text. And then I can choose how I want to insert it in the paper. So all of that is to try to help you make sure that as you're going along writing, that you're citing things properly. Okay. Now there are non-supported citation managers out there, and generally most of them are free for a basic level. So it'll say you can share with X number of people, or you get X amount of storage space in the cloud for backup, and then you have to pay for more. Two of the best of the non-supported citation managers are Mendeley and Zotero. So we don't have anyone at UGA who we can say is an official Mendeley or Zotero trainer. I probably come the closest on Mendeley, that I, on my own, have what they call level 2 citation for certification, for Mendeley. So I might be able to answer some questions about Mendeley if you wanted to contact me via email or give me a call. The client is very similar to EndNote, so it looks a lot like EndNote. And the website for the online space has a social component, and it's a little bit like Facebook in that you can follow a researcher, and if they post something, a new article, then you could see, oh, hey, that researcher has something new they just published. So it's very nice. The only thing is we don't really have any support for it through UGA. We don't have it as an official program. Another one that's very good is Zotero, and a lot of people got into Zotero because it had a feature that kind of sits in your browser, and you could import in information on websites, so it made citing websites easier. Most of your citation managers are trying to have those kinds of plugins. So it's not as unique, but it's kind of well known for having that feature. And again, there's not anyone at UGA who is a particular expert in Zotero. So if you chose a non-supported citation manager, you'd be dependent on whatever software support that they provide. Okay, so now I have some section sources. So basically, this is just the information that indicates where some of my slide content came from. So wanted to make sure I cited. This is in a rough APA format. It's not completely correct because it's not hanging, doesn't have a hanging indent, but yes, we did want to cite our sources. So that was a quick rundown for me. I wanted to stick to about 20 minutes, so I think I'm at 3:17. So I want to hand this over to Mariann.
Thank you, Sandra. That was excellent. And I want to talk to you today about copyright and outline the difference between what is plagiarism and what is copyright infringement. So before we get started on my segment, I want to talk a bit about my learning goals to just kind of define for us the scope of what we're talking about, because copyright is a pretty huge subject. So we only have about 45 minutes. So again, as I mentioned, I want to talk about what is the difference between plagiarism and copyright infringement. And with copyright, we're only going to cover basics like criteria, such as what does a work need to show for it to have copyright protection by law, the types of works that are protected, what kinds of things are not protected by copyright. Also importantly, what does it mean to be protected by copyright? I'm sure you've all have heard this phrase before, but maybe we need some clarity on what that really means in terms of legally. And of course, exceptions to the copyright owners. So first off, what is the difference between copyright and plagiarism? So copyright basically is a legal right for an author to profit from his or her work, whereas plagiarism is all about proper attribution. So in US copyright law is less concerned with attribution, meaning US copyright law is less concerned with someone giving credit to another for using their work. It's more concerned with financial rights. And does your use of the copyrighted work interfere with that other person's work when they're trying to basically market it or sell it, you know? So it's really all about economics. Whereas in European countries and other countries place more emphasis on attribution as part of their copyright regime. So this is how in the US we're a little bit different in that regard. So copyright infringement is a legal violation, which means that one could get sued, go to court if one is making improper use of someone else's work. Next is that you may be properly attributing someone else's work. You know, as you may recall, Sandra showed these two columns where she took a big block of text and put it into a properly paraphrased paragraph and put the author's credit. Well, you could do that, but if you are copying too much, giving credit to the person, it still may be copyright infringing. So there are two different things. So the thing we want to drive home today is what is an authorized use of copyright, of a copyrighted work? You know, what does it mean to be infringing? It basically means if you're doing any one of those things in the bullet list, which is copying, distributing, displaying, performing, or creating a derivative work based of someone else's work without either their permission or some sort of exception in the law that allows you to do that without asking their permission. So I know a lot of this stuff is pretty dense, and just kind of stick with it. I know it feels like a lot of mental gymnastics when I talk about copyright, but again, I'm available for for questions after the session. So let's talk about what it means for a work to be eligible for copyright protection. Basically three things. It has to be minimally creative, original, and fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So let's do one at a time here. Minimally creative. Basically that means it has to show creativity that is above the threshold of something like a list. There's a famous landmark Supreme Court case from 1991 that basically said that a phone book directory is not minimally creative. So if you think of anything above and beyond a listing, of factual information, that's minimally creative. Also note that US copyright law has a pretty low bar for what it means for a work to be copyright protected. Other countries have more stringent criteria for a work to be protected. It's not just minimally creative, it has to be really creative. So second, we have a work that's original, it's new, it's not just a rehashing of some other old work. And then lastly, we have fixed and a tangible medium of expression. And this is really important. The work has to be fixed in some sort of a medium, like on paper, on a computer, on a something. It has to be reproducible. So in other words, this is where a lot of people get confused between ideas and expression. Ideas and copyright, ideas are not protected by copyright law. They may be protected by patent law, but not in copyright. So what copyright protects is expression. It's how you say something. So let's say, for example, there is a movie about a boy wizard. You could have your own expression of what a boy wizard looks like. But if you try to make it a little too close to J.K. Rowling's work, then you're really infringing. So, copyright does not protect the idea of a boy wizard, but it does protect J.K. Rowling's expression of what a boy wizard looks like. Okay, let's talk a bit about formalities, and this is kind of yet another dense topic, but it's important to note when you're dealing or trying to identify work for your research or publications. Copyright is automatic here in the US for works that are published after March 1, 1989. And this is when our country joined the Berne Convention to stay in line with an international treaty. So just because you don't see that little C copyright notice on something, it doesn't mean that it's not protected by copyright. Remember, the three criteria that we talked about. A work will get copyright protection automatically, and it doesn't need that little C on it. The registration with the US copyright is not necessary, but it is if someone is filing anticipates filing a lawsuit to get their rights. You need to show proof that this is your work and you've registered it. But for the most part, you don't need to register a copyright. As far as how long it lasts for a really long time. It's life of the author plus 70 years, which is the rule of thumb. There are a lot of variations on that, just because there have been different revisions to the law over the years. But just assume that, what you see, it's life of the author plus 70 years. So copyright lasts for a really long time. So moving on to what are things that are not protected by copyright, meaning what are the things that you can use without having to find a copyright owner to ask them permission or rely on something in the law that tells you can use it without asking permission. Basically works in the public domain. And public domain includes a pretty broad number of things. Such as expired copyright. So those are works published in 1924 or earlier. So, copyright expires after a certain period of time and new works enter the public domain. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Facts, just basic scientific facts, copyright does not protect. US federal government documents or any kind of work that's produced by the federal government is in the public domain, and data, raw data. And make a note of why these things are in the public domain. Uh, it's because copyright seeks to promote, authors' rights to be able for them to profit from their work, their creative works, but also to balance the public interest. So, things that are factual. It would be unimaginable that you would have to go seek permission from somebody who manufactured a fact. It just doesn't work that way. These are in the public domain. Ideas, any kind of logos. Logos may be protected by trademark law, but not copyright. Something to be aware of is that certain states produce material that they could enforce their copyright to, and Georgia is one of those states. But there are other states that make their material into the public domain. And then lastly, there's something that I didn't include here is that works that people, for creators, authors, musicians, what have you, want to donate their work into the public domain. So that does happen. So what kinds of works are we talking about that have copyright protection? Pretty much anything all around you, literary works, music, dramatic works, even pantomimes, believe it or not. I guess they can be reproduced. Pictures, images, sculptural works, of course, movies, any kind of audio recordings, sound recordings, and architecture. So pretty much the whole world around you. Okay, I touched on this a bit about why copyright, why does it exist? And the origins go back to the US Constitution, where Congress wanted to promote in the early republic people making creative works to spur progress in this early country. And to do that, they would secure a limited time for authors to be able to make a profit of their works and exclude others from doing so, but also balancing the need for the public to use those creative works and discoveries. So it's really about a balancing act with rewarding authors, but at the same time allowing people to make good use of these works without having to pay each time. So there are some carve-outs for these owners' rights, and that's what we call exceptions. And that's where fair use fits in. And that's primarily what we're concerned about, where in education, fair use gets heavy reliance because we all publish things, we all write assignments, write papers, do exams, and we quote from other people, and we're not going to each time go out and ask permission to do an assignment, to ask the owner's permission to do that. That would be highly unmanageable. Other things that I want to touch on briefly, but not too much, is sections like 108, for example, that allows library copying and ILL. I'm sure as a student or as a professor, you all may have requested an interlibrary loan article, and the ability for us in libraries to do that depends on Section 108, which by law allows us to copy something and send it to you all for, if we don't have the journal here in our collection. For sale, it's really an important one, and one that's not highly recognized. So, when you go and sell your old books or your old CDs, and I do have a tremendous number of CD collection that I do need. I don't even know if I can sell them at this point. Nobody wants them, but 109 is the section in the law that allows us to sell our book collection, our books or our CDs, and another really important one for you to be aware of is Section 121, which allows special formats for the blind or otherwise disabled. So um, we have disability resource centers on college campuses, and um, this section allows us to copy like full text works. If a visually impaired student needed a whole entire book, we will do it because this is what this section allows. Okay, and that's above and beyond what normal exceptions allow. Okay, because these are provisions for the disabled, and that's really important. Okay, so why do we care about this at all? Why are we even talking about copyright? It's because you are making use of copyrighted works all around you for your academic career, whether you're a student or professor or postdoc or whatever. And it, you know, it deals with publishing the dissertation. You need to know what rights and what options you have with your work as the author. Publishing research articles when you're transferred copyright to a publisher. What can you do with those articles afterwards? Or what can't you do? Um, One of the important things too, to think about copyright in terms of beyond just being a student or a teacher is if you work in a company, for example, and your employment status is, let's say, a work for hire, what you're able to do with the work that you author in that place is going to be different from what you can do here as a UGA student, because in a lot of employment situations, a company would own the rights to your works, and that's what's called a work for hire. Here at UGA, as a student or a faculty member, you own the works that you author, except for assignments. Keep that in mind. That distinction is pretty important because when you write an exam, for example, or an assignment, a paper, it's important to note that the university owns rights to that because the university treats it as if it's asking you to write a work. It's commissioning you to write something, and they own the rights to it. Whereas you publish an article with an outside journal, that those rights belong to you because it's an independent work. So I want to talk a bit about what triggers a copyright issue. A lot of people have this conception that anything I do, anything I use is going to trigger a copyright issue, and that's not always true. If you're using a work from the public domain, of course, that's not going to be a problem. It's public domain. But the trick here is understanding, is it really public domain? Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not entirely clear. If you have permission from the author for a copyrighted work, then there's not a problem. Or if you're relying on fair use or one of those other exceptions that I talked about, there are no copyright issues with these. And also please note that when I say there's no issue with something, there are probably a million qualifications to that statement, okay? As you know, the law is not very straightforward in copyright. So when does a copyright issue get triggered? It's again, when you're doing any one of those functions with someone else's copyrighted work, reproducing it, for example, copying it and putting it on a social network medium, social media, or distributing it. For example, a professor copying a journal article and giving copies of it to all his 400 students. Creating a derivative work, which means taking the original work and making something new out of it. Displaying it publicly. Also note, putting something on the web, that could also mean displaying it publicly because the web is a public forum, if you think about it. Performing, if it's a play or a creative work or a poem, reading a poem or playing a song, playing a movie at like a movie night in a public place. Those types of things are where the red flags are. You see that little graphic there from Lawrence Lessig where it says unregulated. That means there's no issue. The guy reading it or giving it to someone reselling it or sleeping on it. Those are unregulated. Okay, so fair use, which is the big exception that we in education rely on. Fair use is a qualitative standard. It is not quantitative. And if you've all, been exposed to this notion of you only copy 5 articles out of a journal or 5% out of a book or whatever, the law does not set numerical limits on what you can do. It sets qualitative limits. The numerical stuff originates from classroom guidelines that are put together by organizations that have an interest in limiting this. At the same time, don't misconstrue what I'm saying as, oh, it's a free for all, What I'm trying to get across is that the law itself, the text of the law itself, does not put the limit copying by numbers, it's by quality. And those are factors. That's what we call the 4 fair use factors. One is the purpose and character of the use. Something is fair use when it is for nonprofit educational purposes, but not always. But it lends that way. And you may see that balance scale, and this is really what it is all about. It's a balancing act. So some use that you may be doing tips the balance toward fair use if you're doing it in a college or university setting or high school or whatever, but not always. You could still be making a commercial use of something, and a court could still find it fair use. And let me kind of preface this discussion of fair use by saying only a court could rule on whether something is fair use or not. So you and I could come up with an analysis. Oh, this looks like fair use. We can agree or disagree, but ultimately a court has to weigh in and come up with a ruling, and then it can get appealed and appealed again, and it can keep going. Sort of like what's going on with the Georgia State Electronic Reserves lawsuit from 2008. Okay, so moving on, the nature of the work. So you may remember I said facts aren't copyrighted. So the more factual the work is and your use of a factual work, that makes it tip toward the fair use spectrum, rather than if you were taking like a whole poem and putting it into your work without asking permission. That would look a little, questionable from a fair use perspective. So the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relationship to the work as a whole, that just simply means, are you using a pretty big portion of it? The bigger portion you use, the less fair use it looks like. But keep in mind that some courts have said you could, an entire work could be used, but it still could be fair use. Are you making a transformative work in the end? Are you just straight copying? The straight copying is not fair use. But if you're transforming it into something, some new function, some new statement in society, that could be a fair use. In the final analysis, factor 4 is really important because it talks about, are you basically interfering with are you causing market harm to the work, to the original work? Courts don't like that people could introduce a new work that's based on someone else's original work that interferes with that original work. Because remember, we talked about economic rights, and that's a very key factor in copyright protection. So here's just kind of like my example of what a fair use assessment would look like, and I hope these seesaw thing is clear, but the arrow going down basically shows an example of something that would not be a strong fair use argument. Factor 1, the character and purpose is educational. Okay, that's fine. But the nature of the work, let's say the color purple, you're using big portions of the book. That sounds kind of questionable. Factor 3, amount and substantiality, entire film. Let's say I want to put it into a course website or something, you know, that interferes with someone going out and buying a copy of it. So that's kind of a clear red line there. With the arrow going up, that shows an example of a strong fair use argument. Character and purpose is educational. Factor 2, nature of work. Let's say it's a documentary on fracking that you want to put into your course project or whatever, you know, ELC, whatever you want to make use for it. Factor 3, amount and substantiality. I'm only using a short clip from a documentary, fine. Factor 4, effect on potential market. It's not a substitute. If someone wanted to go out and buy the entire film, that they can certainly do that because you're only giving them a short clip. So that's an example of a good fair use. I want to just briefly highlight something called Creative Commons, which you may be aware of. Creative Commons is a way to license your work as an author that allows you to be in more control of your copyrights. That basically you are licensing your work under a license that you choose to other people, you know, that you can select from one of 6 licenses to, let's say, for example, allow another person to make a commercial use if you wanted to of your work or not make a commercial use. So you could just go on creativecommons.org and learn more about it. And I think at this point we're at the questions segment. So I think we're gonna unmute your mic.
Yeah, that'll be just a minute.
My question was, with the copyright thing, is it possible to work on the copyrighted project far away from the place it is established?
Can you give me an example?
I mean, about the distance thing that you mentioned earlier. I mean, if you have something invented in, say, America, then can you work it on some Asia or somewhere?
Does your question go specifically to like a patenting something?
Yeah.
Filing a patent? I'm not really a patent expert. I would recommend you go on the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, uspto.gov, and start your research there.
Okay.
It
I mean, what about the copyright thing?
Well, it's complicated when you're dealing with copyright in multiple countries because not everyone has the same set of rules on copyright. So Mariann said that the US has a fairly low bar, and that may not be the case in other countries.
Yeah. It depends. I mean, what your specific situation is, and if you are dealing with like a multi-country copyright situation, I would recommend talking to a copyright lawyer, a lawyer who specializes in copyright, international copyrights.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. Thank you.
Any more questions? Oftentimes we download pictures from the website and then put in our presentation. Sometimes we website.
I'm sorry, we can't hear your question very well.
Are you asking for a website? Which website?
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, great now. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the citation for the pictures. Oftentimes we download the pictures from like any kind of website, we Google it. When we cite in our presentation, we just put the website like to set a picture. But I'm not sure, is that a good way to set the pictures?
I think the fact that you have a direct URL to where you got the picture is extremely helpful. It kind of depends a little bit on the context. If you're just doing a class presentation, that's probably sufficient. If you were doing an article, you would have to make sure who the real author of that image was. So for example, there's a lot of images on the internet that are kind of memes that no one seems to own, or we don't know who the original creator is. So it kind of depends on the context of what the image is. But if you're just kind of in passing illustrating an idea on PowerPoint, and then at the end of your slides, you've got the URL where you obtain that picture, I mean, that's probably sufficient. But anything where you're going to kind of distribute something, it's probably good to make sure you know who the actual author of the image is.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, hopefully that answered that. And of course, you know, you're welcome to shoot us emails, you know, if you need something in more detail.